Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on part 2 of a conversation Dick and I had about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and Australian Grand Prix. We close out our conversation discussing the driver pairings and how to contextualize this month's races within the 2024 calendar. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, so then moving on to drivers. In almost all these situations I'm going to match up, it's 2 people, but in this first instance, I actually want to bring in 4 because in my mind, Red Bull is the Red Bull universe of VCARB and Red Bull. Verstappen, Perez, Ricciardo, Tsunoda. And especially because everyone has been talking about potentially Ricciardo or Tsunoda coming in and taking that second seat away from Perez. We've talked about Verstappen and Sergio, and I didn't say it earlier, but I want to go back and say that I was slightly disappointed with Checo, and you can't see my air quotes, but I did air quotes around the word slightly, in that I don't know that I blame him per se. I do think he should have been higher on the starting grid in Australia and ultimately ended up higher in the results. But even he, as I said earlier, mentioned that he had challenges with the car. So I'm willing to extend a little bit of grace. But that said, if he'd started higher on the grid initially, I think he actually could have held off the other 2 teams of McLaren and Ferrari and or changed the results of the race. So that's where I'm a little saddened by him and his performance. But that's also keeping in mind that in the past 2 races he's been number 2. I just want to see a little bit more from him. I think moving forward, I didn't think that he should have been as low as he was, but maybe it was just the car and maybe it was giving him more trouble over the course of the weekend that any of us may have realized. So that's kind of how I come on Sergio. But then I feel like Yuki and Daniel, Yuki, it seems, is really striving to meet that goal of can I prove myself worthy of that seat? I'm actually kind of impressed with him. I haven't listened to his radio, but if he has tempered himself and harnessed his energy, I'm really going to commend him for that because that's what's always really kind of put me off about him. And I felt like the outburst and the unrestrained attitude was a sign of immaturity for someone at that level. Like I could see that in a lower formula, but at Formula One, I feel like that was leading into his unreliability. If he can continue harnessing that and doing as well as he seems to be doing already at the outset, I mean, goodness gracious, he can really achieve some new heights. The flip side of that is for Daniel. I am like super concerned for him in the sense that when we talk about the driver pipeline, and Daniel has been in this for quite some time and given the opportunity to return back because of so much goodwill that I think that people have and expectations that they have. And I also think that they see what a media star he is. But I'm just wondering, like, when we think about there's only so many seats, there are other drivers who merit placement in not only the Red Bull seat, but even that VCARB seat. And I just hope that he's able to figure out what's going on. If not, as harsh as it is for someone like me to say, because I generally don't say this. Usually you guys are harder and I'm trying to learn to be not so soft and nice. Like there are other drivers that I want to see get the opportunity to get that road in and break this log jam. But maybe that goes to the politics and things like that you've mentioned about how seats sometimes get taken up. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Daniel made the comment that was like during qualifying, it was sort of like that I drove a perfect lap and I'm 14th. How am I 14th? Or something like that, And so it makes you wonder about, is it the car? Because I mean, like we've always said, I don't think Daniel's forgotten how to drive, and I think he wants to continue to do well. And so, I don't know. I'm like you. I hope that he finds the handle. And one of the things he does bring is an enormous amount of experience, right? And with the
Hmm.
restricted testing, in many respects, man, it's hard for a rookie to break in because he just doesn't have that experience, whereas Daniel does. And so that's one area where you kind of got to wonder.
Hmm.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I hope he gets it together. But right now, there's no question, Yuki's quicker.
We'll see. We'll wait and see. Let's move on to Leclerc and Sainz, and I will add in a third person, Behrman. I was concerned for Carlos, especially when it came to Saudi Arabia and Ollie coming in, and that he didn't have that race to show others why he deserved a 2025 seat. That said, I think Australia more than covered him. He just needs to now keep it up, in my opinion. After Saudi Arabia, I stated that I wondered if Charles should be concerned about Ollie's performance. And I have to say, after Australia, I still wonder that. Not saying that Charles didn't do good at all. I'm just thinking that Ferrari now seems to have multiple options of people to occupy that seat. And if Charles continues to have like the problems more, what you guys have said, like the psychological from the past years, I just don't want him to lose
Hmm.
sight of it. So like I hope he's getting the support and going and seeking out that psychological help to keep him strong, knowing that Lewis is on his way there and the psychological toll that's going to take on him, because this very well may be the car he's been waiting for. And as we said with Fred leading the team, this very well may be Charles's moment. And I don't think I said this earlier, but kind of like as an aside, I have to declare this now. I'm a Fred Vasseur fangirl. So if I've been a Charles fangirl, I'm a Fred Vasseur. I know I've said I'm a Toto, which I am too. I just think that Fred, I like his style, his demeanor, and especially his
Hmm.
leadership approach. And the more I'm reading about him, learning about him, and the more I see him and the effects of his leadership, I'm really impressed by it. He seems to not take things too seriously, but he takes the serious stuff serious, if that makes sense. And he also seems to have everyone's respect. I haven't heard anybody kind of dissing him or anything like that. The drivers seem to have respect for him, which I can't imagine is an easy thing. And then for him to be a Frenchman coming into an Italian culture, and if he is
Right.
adjusting all of this, that's kind of amazing,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so
Well,
I have to state that now. I know you can make fun of me moving forward,
no,
but
it's all right.
I had to say that.
Yeah, I'm interested by Fred in that, he came from Sauber slash Alfa Romeo. They'd been using Ferrari engines, so it wasn't like he was an unknown. And he's certainly got a proven track record in leading other teams and all that kind of stuff. And I think he's got the kind of demeanor that is actually the yin to Ferrari's yang. And
Mm,
so, yeah, I think that that's really, it's been a good pickup for them, right?
yeah.
Um, as far as Carlos is concerned, yeah, he's driving for his job in 2025. And this win has shown that not only is he capable of winning a race, this is, I think, his third race now that he's won
Mm-hmm.
in his career. It also shows that he's made us some pretty stern stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm a Mercedes, if I'm a Red Bull, if I'm an Aston Martin, if I'm a Audi, I'm looking at this guy saying, yeah, you know, um, it would be nice to have his services over the long term because he clearly knows how to pedal the car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think right, and I think he's kind of saying, "Hey, Ferrari, um, you really didn't need to hire Lewis."
Yep. Yep. I think you're spot on that last statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I would hate to be right, but I think I will be. I think Ferrari will rue the day that they let go of Carlos.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I don't know
Yeah,
what that will look like, but I think that they will miss Carlos because he seems to have all the building blocks there, especially when you just mentioned all those different teams. I also was thinking the teams that he's already been with and how all of them benefited from him being a teammate to the person that he was a teammate to.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I do think Charles's friendship and camaraderie, even just the way that he's maintained that, and then what Carlos has maintained with Lando, that just goes to like the that's the stuff that you can't train into somebody, right? That's just who they are.
exactly, exactly.
And so I think that Ferrari will miss that
Yeah,
moving forward, that stability that they got from him, who also can pull out the wins too, and
yeah,
like two stallions pushing each other to be better and not, and being able to keep it off the field. Kind of some of the stuff that I had read about old school, like in the 50s, some of the drivers that, they could go toe to toe with each other on the track and then go have pints and all that kind of stuff and really push each other to excel. Other pairings, which one of them is Carlos's former teammate Norris. What do you think about Norris and Piastri? How have they been doing in your mind?
well, anytime they go and they introduce their driver lineup, right? You always hear the team principal, especially Christian Horner. Oh, we're so excited about this lineup, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? Those two guys actually are an exciting lineup. And I think, they get along, they partner together. They're certainly delivering results. I mean, McLaren's partners have got to be happy with this combination of drivers. And I think it's really only a matter of time before both of them are winning. I mean, they're clearly talented drivers. And of course, Piastri won that sprint race, which, okay, cool. Glad he did. But, Norris and Piastri, pretty impressive. They're only going to get better with age. So, yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to watch them develop.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they are such a smart investment that Zach Brown has made and locking them in also very wise. I don't think he's going to regret that at all.
Yep.
Hamilton and Russell. What do you think
Hmm.
about those two?
It's fascinating, I think. You don't ever want to believe that a guy the caliber of Lewis Hamilton, and when I say caliber, I mean not only the driver but the person, right? Um, it's hard to imagine that this guy's checked out. So I don't think that's happened. But there is clearly, like you said earlier on, he felt it in the simulator and now he's feeling it in the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drove him to go to Ferrari. It was sort of like, yeah, we're just not going to get this right. I'm out. And so he may be trying to do the best job that he can do for the team, but because he dislikes the car so much, um, he hasn't checked out, but maybe he's not as enthusiastic as he used to be,
Hmm.
which would be, from a human level, totally understandable. I mean, I get
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, on the other hand, certainly George seems to have the upper hand. Last year, well, let's go back. In 22, George had a slight upper hand. 23, Lewis came back with a vengeance and had the upper hand on George. Now we're starting a new year. Lewis is struggling more than George. Um, yeah, both of them didn't finish in Australia. And to a large degree, that was neither one of them's fault. Um, but you got to wonder if maybe George found something over the winter, you know? And with Lewis leaving, you really can't think of him as the team leader anymore. That's going to have to be Toto. But I'm sure George is trying to exert himself as being the team leader in the vein that Lewis was in. Um, and because Lewis has left, there's got to be hurt feelings somewhere within the organization. So maybe the team has moved on from Lewis.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I don't disagree with any of it.
So,
it is unfortunate. I think we're gonna
Yeah,
have to see how this unfolds,
yeah,
and it will sadden a lot of, I think, a lot of longtime Mercedes fans
yeah.
to see this saga and how it closes. I don't think this is the way anybody wanted to see the end of the Lewis era at
I will add this,
Mercedes.
just an interesting aside, to give you an idea of the power and the reach of Formula One.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I every Sunday morning I drive to church, take the same route that I go and all that. And every Sunday morning, I'm about the same time, a black Mercedes C300 goes by, and the license plate basically reads HAM F1 44. And I'm like, that's pretty amazing that somebody is that big of a fan that they would put Lewis Hamilton number 44 on their car, on their personalized license plate.
No joke. In Texas, of all places, too.
In Texas. Yeah, now you probably would not see that in Midland, Texas, but Dallas, you do. So,
That's for sure.
pretty amazing.
What about Alonso and Stroll? What I have a lot of thoughts on this,
Why don't
and
you
I
go
know
first?
that you were a fan of Alonso, so hopefully I won't say anything that will hurt your feelings
You're not
on
going to hurt
this.
my feelings.
Okay. But I'll start with Stroll's safety car in Saudi Arabia. That was so odd to me. I didn't understand how that happened, but I was really impressed with how Alonso held off George there and
Yep.
got the team much needed points. But my opinion was not good post Australia when it comes to Alonso. From all the commentary I've been able to consume, and again, since I'm not the tech person and I'm not a STEM person, so I'm going off of what I'm hearing in the commentary, right? It seems that he brake tested George, which led to the crash. If I split it up, it's more the crash and George's radio that made me very distressed. I still can't understand why there wasn't an immediate red flag or VSC. And I said this to you offline. I've been like, more and more people are realizing my passion for F1. And so they've tried to go watch Drive to Survive. And I don't send them there, but they tend to go there. And the thing that I've had more people ask me is, wow, there's so many crashes. And they, especially that first episode, has a ton of crashes and it freaks some people out. And I have had to explain to them that's actually not the goal of Formula One, is not to
Yeah,
crash the
that's for
car. Like,
sure.
it's the
Exactly.
complete opposite. It should be the exception, not the rule. But you have to
Right.
understand why these crashes happen. That was in the back of my head as I was listening to the radio that we ended up getting a few hours ago of what George had said of like red flag, and just the panic, sheer panic. And maybe also because we haven't released this episode yet, but you and I have sat down and talked about the safety measures that F1 has done over the decades,
Right.
and when we know how gruesome this has been and how, but then how much effort the sport has gone to make this as safe as possible. You know, it's never going to be 100% safe. I just was really confused by that. And it only made me respect George more in the sense of what he and every one of those athletes do of putting themselves on the line. And if the calls aren't made correctly or timely, and if everybody isn't paying attention, how bad something can happen very quickly. So I don't necessarily want to say it's Alonso's fault. Like, that's not so much, because a crash can happen for a variety of reasons,
Hmm.
but it was reading and hearing them say that he had brake tested George, and then subsequently the crash happens. That's my takeaway from this month more than anything, is Stroll's Saudi Arabian crash, which led to the safety car, which created all that kerfuffle right during that race,
Yep.
and the Alonso at the end of the Australian and how it impacted George. So that's my view.
Okay. Well, now I haven't looked at the telemetry, of course, or anything like that. So I'm still scratching my head exactly where the marshals or the stewards of the event are coming from in assessing a 20-second penalty on Alonso. The responsibility of the following car, right, is to stay out of the way of the car in front of them. In other words, if you're going to go and make a pass, on the car in front of you, it is your responsibility to make sure that that pass is safe.
Mhm.
George was obviously pursuing Fernando. Fernando saw him coming. I'm sure that Fernando, I mean, and he admitted it. He let off the gas sooner, he braked sooner, he downshifted sooner. So he is not denying any of that. And of course, the other side of it is that he was going to square the car up in the corner, get on the gas sooner to make it more difficult for George to pass him down the following straight. George was not going to make the pass going into that corner where Fernando let off early because he was too far back. But what happened is George then got caught up in Fernando's dirty air, and that's what caused this crash. He lost the rear of the car, and boom. So I don't know that that's worthy of a penalty. Now, was it a dirty trick? Yeah, probably. But that's kind of what you would expect from a guy that's been doing it for 22 years. He kind of wrote the book in a lot of ways about how do you drive a race. When you think about him and some of the battles like last year with Sergio Perez, I'm sure that they were doing some dirty stuff to each other that nobody would see unless you were looking at the telemetry. And they both kind of got out of the car and was like, shook hands and said, yeah, good race. So I don't know. It's probably not the first time he's done something like that. So
Right.
I'm not totally sold on it. And as far as the virtual safety car and red flags and all that kind of stuff, remember that was midway through the last lap of the race. And so, they had double yellow flags waving and all that. And, one yellow flag is one thing, but when you got double yellow flags, that means, hey, there's a big one. You better start slowing down. And of course, there's spotters talking in the driver's ears saying, hey, heads up, this is what's going on. Here's the condition of the track. So, yeah. So, but it is what it is. And I think tellingly, Aston Martin said they're not going to appeal that.
I do agree with you on that. I think that it's not a clear-cut
Right.
situation, and that it does, I think the end of the race aspect of it too has to be accounted for, in the sense of like everybody's attention and the energy, right? Like there might have even been within their mindset of like, okay, well, this is where it's really going to count. Where are we ending up
Right.
in our standings? And especially for a team like Aston that wants to make sure it stays at the top of the pack. And I do agree that this may not be the first time that Alonso's done something. And as you said, it may not, it's the question of, is it worth a penalty? And if you separate the two, right? Behavior of the driver versus the crash, I think that's how you would have to analyze it. The crash
Right.
can't be the thing that he's penalized for. It has to be for the tactics or the, how he's
Right.
driving. I can see why you would question that part. I feel a little bit better, but I don't feel like 100% comfortable, but it is what it is. Well,
Yeah.
it is part of the racing world. We have to just work through that. Okay, so
Yep.
then let's move on to Albon and Sargent. I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. I'm plugging our Instagram post where I think it's kind of, in my opinion, self-explanatory as to some of the way that we analyze this, or at least you guys analyzed it with me when I raised my question as to why Williams made that choice. And I see what the team was looking at, and especially after you guys walked me through your point of view, I really see it. It still seems unfair, and especially in the aftermath of Alex not scoring the point, it just hurts for Logan. But I also hear what you said earlier in our conversation where we're discussing Williams, that it just really, it's much bigger than Logan, and he really did handle this very
Yep.
well. So
Yep.
my hope is he is going to harness whatever emotional, psychological aspect this may have on him towards action moving into the rest of the season,
Right.
and not let it mess with his head. And I do think he has that ability, because we saw that whatever was needed for him to do better in 2023, he did take those measures in winter break.
Yes.
Like they said that. So
Yep.
clearly he has the capacity to adjust. And it really, I think, goes to the time and and laps that we've talked about, that especially
Right.
American drivers need, but they're put on because of the way that you get onto the grid.
Exactly.
So hopefully Logan can just push this aside and keep going, like that resilience is there. It
Yep.
also makes me wonder, because John noted, or maybe it was you, that they are planning to build the chassis in time for Japan.
Right.
What if that chassis isn't built in time though? Would they repeat this decision? Do you think?
Probably so. I think it's really interesting because if you think about the fact that clearly the manufacturing capacity at Williams is compromised,
Mm-hmm.
you're not talking about just a chassis. There's a
Right.
whole bunch of pieces that got wadded in that crash, right?
Right.
And so, how many other pieces are going to have to be built, even if they have the spares to put them on the new chassis? And I don't think it'll be a new chassis. I think it's going to be a repaired chassis. How many spares are they going to consume putting a new car together? And then if somebody has an off, what does that do to their spares inventory? Right?
Mm.
What if you go and you smash two left wishbones and a push rod? Do you have two left push rods, two wishbones and a push rod?
Probably not, because
Probably
we
not.
heard them say that last year they didn't have all the stuff that they needed, which, and like so much of it went onto Albon's car and Logan didn't get
Correct.
because they were so strapped.
Yep.
Interesting. Ay vey. Oh, poor Williams. They really need to hopefully follow through with the stuff that we said
It's such a
earlier.
great name, and you know what? I'm just rooting for James. I really
Mm-hmm.
am. I like that
Mm-hmm.
guy, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
rooting for him. Yeah,
Same. I do think the idea of T cars need to be revisited though, especially
I
under this
agree.
cost cap era. I don't under when you guys brought that back up, I was like, "Oh, that's right." And I
Yeah,
don't understand why that's not there, because it seems like such a obvious
right.
solution and it
Well,
wouldn't penalize. It seems contra to what the whole purpose of the cost cap should be.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's in there, air quotes for cost savings, but what did it save Williams this time? Well, probably not much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I just think it's real interesting. And, the other thing that I would say though is if they didn't have time to build the chassis, right, in time
Mm-hmm.
for the start of the season, then that means they wouldn't have had time for the T car, even if it was allowed.
Oh, that's true too. That's uh so
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Gets
Okay,
better, doesn't
Williams,
it?
you guys can do it. You guys can do it. We believe in you. Anything that you think a new fan or developing fan should keep in mind regarding these races? That will be
Well,
our last question before we close out for today.
I think that, okay, we've had three races. Two of them were highly predictable. One was highly unpredictable, for obvious reasons. Um, but three very different tracks. Um, I think Japan being again another very different track. That's 2 weeks from now. And of course, Japan has traditionally been in the fall. Now it's in the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. Um, Golly, I mean, I think then I think that at least for the initial pecking order, we should have a pretty good viewpoint because it's been, multiple tracks that are different, whether it's the highly abrasive surface in Bahrain, a very, very fast street circuit in Saudi. You've got Albert Park, which is obviously another street circuit, but a different kind of street circuit. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have the first, you know, track that you would say is probably more typical of what the drivers are going to see in Europe, even though Suzuka is a very specialized place. It is, in my mind, more of um, a different challenge than the other permanent circuit that we've
Mm-hmm.
seen so far, which is Bahrain. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
ought to be Japan should be really interesting.
Yeah, a good benchmark, it sounds like,
Yeah,
for us at that point in the season. The cars or the
yep,
teams understanding their cars a little bit better and having some good balance in their, going back to the Gary Anderson, their philosophy, being able
yep.
to figure out if it's playing out properly.
Okay.
Okay, wow. Well, this has been another great conversation, Dick. I'm really grateful for your time and look forward to our next one.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.